The rain came down over the city like static on an old wire. Midnight had already punched the clock, but the threat desk was still lit, still breathing, still waiting for the next bad name to crawl out of the alley. The date was August 23, 2026, and the case files were stacked high enough to block the neon from the window. Tonight was not petty theft. Tonight had murders on the board. 4 critical cases, each one a command line with a knife in its hand. 2 routers from D-Link. 1 travel router from GL-iNet. 1 old repeat offender from Palo Alto Networks, already caught in the act by CISA's known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. The kind of perp that does not knock. It just walks in through the front door and starts issuing orders. First on the slab was CVE-2026-18612, a critical murder with a CVSS score of 928 and an EPSS probability of 2%. The victim was the GL-iNet GL-MT3000, affected up to firmware version 4.4.5. The broken lock was command injection, most closely tied to CVE-78, improper neutralization of special elements used in an OS command. The vulnerable code sits in the native plugin component, plugins.so, reach through CGG bin GL-C. The dangerous functions are plugins.removePackage and plugins.installPackage. An attacker sends a crafted remote request to that CGI endpoint, placing shell metacharacters or command separators inside package-related input. The native plugin builds an operating system command without safe argument handling. Then the device shell does the rest. What was supposed to install or remove a package becomes a remote command execution lane. The scope is ugly because these little boxes travel. The GL-MT3000, known as the Barrel AX, is a portable Wi-Fi 6 router used by remote workers, travelers, small offices, labs, and privacy-minded users running VPN tunnels on the road. Firmware versions up to and including 4.45 are in the blast radius. A remote attacker who can reach the management interface can gain command execution on the router, likely with the privilege level of the web management process, and in many embedded router cases that means root or near root control. From there, the attacker can change DNS, steal VPN configuration, install persistence, proxy traffic, join a botnet, or use the router as a foothold into a trusted laptop behind it. Exploitation appears remote. Whether authentication is required may depend on device exposure and configuration, so the safe assumption is this. If the admin interface is reachable from an untrusted network, you have a loaded gun on the table. The remedy is to upgrade GL-MT3000 firmware to 4.4.6 or later, or the first vendor build newer than 4.4 that explicitly lists CVE-2026-18612 in its security notes. Sysadmins and home office support teams should disable WAN site administration, restrict the web interface to a trusted management VLAN, and place the device behind a firewall rule that allows administration only from known source addresses. DevOps and security teams managing field kits should inventory every GL-iNet unit and confirm firmware by device, not by purchase date. For detection, look in web access logs and device logs for requests to CGG bin GL-C involving plugins. Install package or plugins.removePackage, especially values containing semicolons, backticks, dollar parentheses, piped WGG, mod, or suspicious package names. A router that suddenly reaches unknown IP addresses after a plugin action deserves a long stare under a bright lamp. But that was not the only body on the slab tonight. CVE-2026-71954 was waiting in the next folder. Another critical murder, CVSS 198, EPSS probability 2%. This one worked the D-Link DWR-M961 hardware version C1 with firmware before 1.1.5 C1 2026-07-71128. The weakness is also command injection, CVE-78. The vulnerable interface is boform form L2TBF config setup, part of the router's web administration service. The attacker sends a crafted HTTP request to that endpoint and places malicious shell syntax in the tunnelid or sessioned field. The BOA web server hands the form data to the L2TPv3 configuration routine. That routine appears to compose a system command or configuration command, using those fields without proper validation or safe execution. The injected text breaks out of the intended parameter and runs as an arbitrary operating system command. The affected range is precise. D-Link DWR N961 hardware revision, C1 running firmware earlier than 1.1.5, C1 2026-07070128 is vulnerable. If an attacker can reach the management interface, they may gain command execution on the router. That can mean traffic interception, SIM or cellular configuration abuse, DNS tampering, firewall rule changes, credential theft, and lateral movement into the internal network. In a ransomware case, this is the first broken window. The crew gets into the edge device, maps the inside, steals credentials, then moves toward file servers and domain infrastructure. Exploitation is remote, and the available description does not require user interaction. Authentication requirements may vary by deployment, but exposed admin panels make this crime scene far worse. The patch is firmware 1.1.5 CC-1-2026-07078 or later for D-Link DWR-M961 hardware revision C1. Network teams should upgrade immediately, especially for units reachable from the internet or carrier networks. Until the patch lands, disable remote administration, block access to BOA Form Timeform L2 Type PV3 config setup from untrusted networks, and restrict management to a VPN or dedicated admin subnet. A WAF or reverse proxy rule can reject tunnelid and sessioned values containing shell metacharacters, but that is a raincoat in a hurricane, not a roof. Detection means reviewing HTTP logs for post requests to BOA Form L2 TPv3 config setup and suspicious field values containing semicolon, ampersand, pipe, backtick, busybox, or wget curl TFTP, busybox, or wget curl TFTP v3 configuration. Also watch outbound traffic from the router to unfamiliar hosts, especially immediately after L2TPv3 configuration changes. CVE-2026-71955 looked like the same neighborhood, same streetlight, different doorway. Critical severity, CBSS 9.8, EPSS probability 2%. The product was again the D-Link DWR-M961 hardware version C1, this time specifically software version 1.112 C1 2026-121-2004. The broken component is BOA Form 26 tied to wireless setup behavior. The flaw is command injection, CVE-78. A remote attacker sends a crafted request to the FormWSC endpoint and injects commands into one of several fields, local pin, target APS. The wireless setup handler processes values that should only describe WPS pins or SSID strings. Instead of strict validation and safe API calls, the handler lets attacker-controlled input reach an operating system command context. The shell interprets the injected payload, and the attacker gets execution. The affected version called out is D-Link DWR-M961 C1 software version 1.112 CC1 C122 CCWR-M961 patch line. Owners should move to firmware 1.15 CC1 patch line. Owners should move to firmware 1.145 CC. The real-world danger is sharp because WPS and wireless configuration features are often overlooked after deployment. A router may sit in a closet for years, quietly bridging trusted internal traffic while its web interface remains open to a support network, or, worse, the public internet. An attacker who lands command execution can alter Wi-Fi settings, harvest admin material, redirect client traffic, install malware, or use the router for persistence. Authentication requirements are not fully clear from the short advisory text, so defenders should treat any reachable management interface as exposed until proven otherwise. The remediation is to upgrade D-Link DWR-M961 C1 devices from 1.1.2 CC1 WR-M.2 CC1 W1.2 CC1 on W1.2 CC, EC1.2 CC, U1.2000 CC CC 07.7.2 CC 7.7.8 or later. Sysadmins should also disable WPS if it is not required, limit access to the web management port, and segment. Pin fields containing anything other than expected digits are a bad sign. SSID fields carrying shell characters, encoded payloads, curl commands, wget downloads, or references to TMP should be treated like fingerprints at the scene. Developers building embedded web handlers should take the lesson home. Never concatenate user input into shell commands. Use fixed argument arrays, strict allow lists, and platform APIs that do not invoke a shell. The night was far from over. EPSS probability 100%. A repeat offender caught in the act listed in CISA's KEV catalog. The product was Palo Alto Network's PAN-OS, specifically the Global Protect feature under certain configurations. The technical wound is a command injection chain caused by arbitrary file creation, commonly mapped to CVE-77 or CVE-78, depending on interpretation, with the root problem being unsafe handling that leads to operating system command execution. The attack starts with an unauthenticated request to a vulnerable Global Protect gateway or portal. The attacker causes the firewall to create a file with attacker-controlled content or path characteristics. A later process in PAN-OS mishandles that file during telemetry or related processing. The result is command execution as root on the firewall. No stolen password, no user click, just a request, a bad file, and a root shell waiting in the dark. The affected versions are specific and tied to configuration. PAN-OS 10.2 versions before 10.29H1, PAN-OS 1.2.0 versions before 11.244H1, and PAN-OS 1.2.4H1 versions before 11.2.3 are vulnerable when Global Protect Gateway or Portal is enabled and device telemetry is enabled. Palo Alto firewalls sit at the edge of enterprises, universities, hospitals, government agencies, and service providers. They are not just appliances, they are gatekeepers. An attacker with root on one can steal configuration, harvest secrets, pivot into VPN traffic, disable security controls, create backdoor accounts, capture credentials, and support ransomware or espionage operations. Exploitation requires no authentication and no user interaction when the vulnerable configuration is present. That is why this case is not theoretical. It has already drawn blood. The remediation is immediate upgrade to PAN-OS 10.2.9H1 or later 11.2.104H1 or later or 11.2H3 or later, depending on your branch. If patching cannot happen at once, disable device telemetry until the upgrade is complete and restrict Global Protect exposure where business allows. Palo Alto also provided threat prevention signatures and guidance, so security teams should confirm content updates are current and applied to traffic-hitting Global Protect interfaces. Firewall administrators, network engineering, security operations, and incident response should work this one together. This is not a ticket to bury in next month's maintenance window. For detection, hunt hard. Review Global Protect and system logs for unusual requests, unexpected file creation, and process behavior around telemetry handling. Look for outbound connections from the firewall to unfamiliar IP addresses, newly created files in temporary or telemetry-related paths, unknown cron entries, suspicious shell execution, and configuration changes not tied to approved work. Treat any vulnerable, exposed, unpatched Global Protect deployment as potentially compromised. Pull tech support files only with care, preserve evidence, rotate secrets stored on or passing through the device, and review VPN account activity. When the informant says 100% EPSS, he is not whispering. He is shouting through a broken phone booth at 3 in the morning. 4 cases. 1 lesson written in rainwater and shell syntax. Edge devices are no longer quiet hardware. They are computers with public faces, privileged positions, and too many forgotten doors. Command injection keeps showing up because web forms keep passing dirty input to operating system shells. That has to stop in product code, and until it does, defenders have to keep management interfaces off the open street. Patch the GL-iNet GL-MT3000 beyond 4.45. Patch the D-Link DWR-M961 C1 to 1.15 C1 2022-607071108 or later. Patch PAN-OS to the corrected hotfix releases and investigate like the intruder may already be inside. Segment the edge, restrict administration, watch the logs, and never trust a field just because it has a friendly name like session ID or local pin. This is Jack Cipher closing the file for tonight. The city is still wet, the wires are still humming, and somewhere out there a bad command is looking for a shell. Keep your doors locked, your firmware current, and your eyes on the edge.